Hello, everyone. Welcome to the 10th study class for the Law and the Promise. Now, for those of you that are new, you can just listen. If you've got the book, you can read along. It is chapter 15 today in the book, The Law and the Promise. I've got a very old copy. And let's see what Neville says today. If at any point you feel that you would like to read, if you have got a copy, just put your little cartoon hand up and I will call on you. And if you don't want to read and you want to ask a question, again, put your little cartoon hand up as well. So today it is the promise, since the book is called The Law and the Promise. 4 mystical experiences. The natural man does not receive the gifts of the Spirit of God, for they are folly to him. And he is not able to understand them because they are spiritually discerned. Corinthians 2.14. There is a moment in each day that Satan cannot find, nor can his watch fiends find it, but the industrious find this moment and it multiply. And when it is once it is found, it renovates every moment of the day if rightly placed. So that's from Blake. Now, going into Neville. In all that I have related thus far, with the exception of GB's vision of the child imagination, was consciously exercised. Men and women create stage plays in their imagination, plays implying the fulfillment of their desires. Now, remember, as we read Neville, dissect Neville, try and work out what on earth he's saying, think of it from the point of view, what have I got going on right now, and can I apply some of this to my current situation? Because the idea is to read Neville, but to get it off the page and into life and make it practical. Okay? So then, by imagining themselves participating in these dramas, they created that which their imaginal acts implied. So when you put your focus on things, whether they are positive and joyful and wonderful, or whether they are fear thoughts, of what you don't want to happen because something's happened in a relationship, at work, with your money, or with your health. It is sometimes thoughts we have are fearful and doubtful and worried and anxious, etc., etc. So the idea is to not stay there too long, and we are human, so it is about acknowledging that we are having a fearful moment, an abandoned moment, a broken-hearted moment, or an anxious moment, and saying, okay, now, if I am in that state, I am focusing on what I don't want. Worry is just putting your focus on unwanted things and then putting fertilizer of emotion onto it. So once we know that, we do it a lot less and we make more effort mentally to change that, because we know if we spend too much time there that it creates in a not good way, what we call miscreations. So let me just read that last bit. Then by imagining themselves participating in these dramas, they created that which their imaginal acts implied, meaning whatever you imagine then translates into a 3D experience. This is the wise use of God's law, but no man is justified before God by the law. Many people are interested in imaginism. Okay, so that is a word, imaginism as a way of life, which is those of us that do Neville a lot, we are imaginists, but are not at all interested in its framework of faith, a faith leading to the fulfillment of God's promise. So what he's saying is people are interested in imagining and enjoy it, but they're not at all interested in its framework of faith, a faith leading to the fulfillment of God's promise. So it really is that our promises can be fulfilled, but there needs to be also the injection of faith and believing that it's possible, not just doing it from the head and going, well, I hope that happens. with no faith, no trust, and no belief. So all of the imaginal scenes, let's say the fuel, the gas, the petrol that goes into the tank is the faith, is the trust, is the belief, is the repetition. That's how we get the imaginal scenes to come to life. I will raise up your son after you, who shall come forth from your body. I will be his father, and he shall be my son. The promise that God will bring forth from our body a son who will be born not of blood, nor of the will of the flesh, nor of the will of man, but of God, does not concern them. They want to know God's law, but not his promise. However, their miraculous birth has been stated clearly as it must for all mankind from the earliest days of the Christian fellowship. You must be born from above. So you connect to above as in God, source, infinite intelligence, and your connection to that source, to that infinite intelligence, and your belief that it is a all-knowing, all-providing source, and then you connect through it through imagination, through the time you spend working internally on certain things. And with the work we've been doing with Neville, it is about doing it consciously rather than unconsciously letting your mind wander around aimlessly on things that cause all those negative emotions, anxiety, fear, abandonment, heartbreak, suffering, depression, etc., loneliness. So it is important to, let's say, lean on the greater source. Yes, we say God is our own human imagination, as Neville says again and again. And it's to tap into that, lean on that, and then use our minds to then, let's say, spiritually mature, because that's what a lot of this work is, spiritually maturing in our understanding and spiritually maturing in our application of what he's talking about. My purpose here is to state it again, and to state it in such a language and with such reference to my own personal mystical experiences that the reader will see this, that this birth from above is far more than a part of dispensable superstructure, that it is the sole purpose of God's creation. So now this chapter is a little bit on the weird side. Okay, it's odd in what Neville is going to describe here. For those of you that have read this book, this is very much a mystical experience of Neville's. I have to say, when I first read this, it put me off. When I read it 30 years ago, I thought, I do not have any interest in having this experience myself. And Neville is sharing what happens to him. I still, let me say, it's remembering it's Neville's experience. It's remembering, I do know two people that have had this experience, and it was very important to them to have this experience. Personally, it is not something that I, let's say, feel the need to experience or particularly would call forth to have this experience. You guys listening today can decide what you think about this. And is this something that appeals to you, or something that you go, okay, this is where it's off the Richter scale and I do not want to go down this path. So see what you think, and I'll ask you at the end. Now, specifically, my purpose in recording these 4 mystical experiences is to show what Jesus Christ, the faithful witness, the firstborn from the dead, was trying to say about this birth from above. How can men preach unless they are sent? Many years ago, I was taken in spirit into a divine society, a society of men in whom God is awake. Though it may seem strange, the gods do truly meet. As I entered this society, the first to greet me was the embodiment of infinite might. He was a power unknown to mortals. I was then taken to meet infinite love. He asked me, what is the greatest thing in the world? I answered him in the words of Paul, faith, hope, and love, these three, but the greatest of these is love. At that moment, he embraced me and our bodies fused and became one body. I was knit to him and loved him as my own soul. The words love of God, so often a mere phrase, were now a reality with a tremendous meaning. Nothing ever imagined by man could be compared with this love, which man feels through his union with love. The most intimate relationship on earth is like living in separate cells compared with this union. While I was in the state of supreme delight, a voice from outer space shouted, "Down with the blue bloods." At this blast, I found myself standing before the one who had first greeted me, he who embodied infinite might. He looked into my eyes, and without the use of spoken words, I heard what he told me. Time to act. I was suddenly whisked out of that divine society and returned to earth. I was tormented by my limitations of understanding, but I knew that on that day, the divine society had chosen me as a companion and sent me to preach Christ God's promise to man. My mystical experiences have brought me to accept literally the saying that all the world's a stage, and to believe that God plays all the parts. The purpose of this play, to transform man, the created, into God, the creator. God loved man, his created, and became man in faith that this act of self-commission would transform man, the created, into God, the creator. So how do we get more into that godly state, godly as in knowing and remembering that we have all these wonderful attributes such as faith, such as surrender, such as love, such as connection, such as feeling fulfilled, satisfied, and all those wonderful emotions that we can feel when we are not tortured and suffering by something in our lives that's caught our attention and is causing us some pain or grief. So Neville had this amazing experience. Was it a mystical experience? Was it a dream? Was he, in a meditative state? There are so many interpretations of this that I've heard over the years, and of course they are interpretations. So this is in his own words. This is what he experienced, and this is a beautiful, amazing thing from how he is describing it. And I think the fact that he mentioned it in this book is that this changed him. It affected him deeply, which again is a very heartfelt and beautiful thing. So it's being reminded that everything comes from love. And the sooner, quicker you can become someone who develops a state of love more often and practice it, then you are able to be more free of all those other emotions, the ones that hurt you, torture you, make you feel like you're suffering, and make you feel that you're in bondage. So it's a powerful thing to feel a connection to, if you use the word God, fine. If you're not into the word God, source, infinite intelligence, universe, whatever tickles your fancy, because it's all labels for the similar thing. But some words have more power than others for us. So going back to what he's saying here, it's like we learn in the beginning that God's over there and we're here. Then you study Neville, and then he talks about God being your own human imagination, that you are God. And then you're kind of going, okay, well, which is it? I think it's both. We come from God, we go back to God, to source. And it is about, okay, how can I remember that, connect with that, sink into that, and bring that into all the things that I do, so that I am rising above all these things that bother me. Not enough money, being overweight, not having the relationship I want, not having the house I want, not having the health I want, and being stuck with a, you know, severe health condition or something that's gone on for many, many years. All these things are at a certain level for us to spiritually, let's say, evolve, mature, and then you are affected less and less by these levels of suffering. But it's a process, as we all know, because there's always something that can potentially pull your attention away from just being in a state of love. So, going on from what he's saying, the play begins with the crucifixion of God on man as man, and ends with the resurrection of man as God. God becomes as we are, that we may be as he is. God becomes man, that man may become first a living being, and secondly, a life-giving spirit. I have been crucified with Christ, as it is no longer I who lives, but Christ who lives in me. And the life I now live in the flesh, I live by faith in the Son of God who loved me and gave himself for me. Okay. So continuing on, I mean, Neville does have quite, you know, heavy religious stuff that goes through parts of the books. For those of you that grew up with religion, you will understand it more than those that don't, but the essence is that you connect with the spirit within, the God within, and you use that to give yourself relief and give yourself, let's say, solutions, rather than diving into despair about what you're currently going through. So God took upon himself the form of man and became obedient unto death, even death on the cross of man, and is crucified on Golgotha, the skull of man. God himself enters death's door, the human skull, and lies down in the grave of man to make man a living being. God's mercy turned death into sleep. Then began the prodigious and unthinkable metamorphosis of man, the transformation of man into God. So, in simple terms, having read this again and again, and you can get so lost in all the words, and it gets really like you feel like you're going around and around in this chapter. Developing a knowing, a connection to, I don't have to do everything on my own. I am able to use my connection to the all-knowing to be able to relax more, free myself more of mental and emotional suffering, and become someone who moves through life until the day of death in more peace and calm. So Neville's experiences, because he's quite descriptive in how he moves through these stages, that this is obviously a personal experience, as we have individually, whether you go to church, whether you're sitting in nature as your church, or whether you're a total atheist. Really, at the end of the day, we can all have amazing, heartfelt, beautiful, transformational experiences ourselves. And you don't have to be, let's say, traditionally plugged in to a system if it's not your thing, or if you do enjoy it, that's fine too. There's no right way or wrong way. There are different ways around the circle. The idea is to spiritually mature. And why? Like, you think, okay, well, who cares about that? Some people care about it, some people don't. Why is that something to consider? because I think the more you spiritually mature, the less you suffer in relationships, with money, with jobs, with health. The whole point of spiritually maturing is to make living here in Earth School more comfortable. The more you have knowledge and understand, the less you suffer, and you don't torture yourself as much as you did, say, in your teens or in your early 20s or whatever. It's like you learn, if you're willing to learn, you evolve into a spiritually more mature human being that suffers less. So no man unaided by the crucifixion of God could cross the threshold that admits to conscious life. But now we have union with God and his crucified self. He lives in us as our wonderful human imagination. So the crucified self is the imagination. Man is all imagination and God is man and exists in us and we in him. So it's all dovetailed and interwoven. The eternal body of man is the imagination that is God himself. So it's like when Neville says we are God, and then he says God is our human imagination, that's how we connect. That's how we connect to the bigger God, the bigger source, the all-knowing, the infinite intelligence, is through the imagining faculty. That's how it works. So when he rises in us, we will be like him and he will be like us. Then all impossibilities will dissolve in us. That touch of exaltation, which his rising in us will impart to our nature. So what's great is what you feel was impossible at one point becomes possible through the dissolving of the impossible thoughts, the impossible beliefs, because you feel perhaps not strong enough to do X, Y, Z. But if you do what you need to do by living in the end, imagining, and then knowing that God will take over and then set the wheels in motion, because it is a focus-based universe, and what you focus on then gets watered, fertilized, and then will hatch at the right time. That's a wonderful thing to know. As I work on my imagination, as I focus more deliberately my imagination, then the impossible becomes possible. And this is what this whole book has been about. For those of you that have come fairly regularly, all the stories we've read over the last 9 sessions have been about seemingly impossible things that people then put their focus on through living in the end, through the use of imagination, to get these things to show up and become a part of their 3D. Here is the secret to the secret of the world. God died to give man life and set man free. For however clearly God is aware of his creation, it does not follow that man imaginatively created is aware of God, which is true. Some people believe in God. Some people have had the experience of witnessing something to do with God internally, or an amazing thing on the external. And they therefore believe, and even more so, they know. But it doesn't mean that all men understand and are aware of God. I mean, I'm sure every single one of you probably knows 1 or 2 or more atheists. Not everybody follows a religious or spiritual life. Either way, it doesn't make those that do better and those that don't worse. I mean, some of the most amazing people I've met have been atheists. And some of the most amazing people I've met have been believers. So it's not that, let's say, gives the credibility to the person. Some people just have it and they know it and they live it. and they are aware of imagining in some way, shape, or form through their connection, whether it's, you know, formalized religion or spiritual practices through an organization, or just a lot of you, I know, because I've spoken to many of you over the years, it's come through school. So however it comes to you, and whichever one you are, what's great is we're all a mixed bag of nuts, and it doesn't really matter. It's the fact that someone can achieve a sense of peace, a sense of groundedness, a sense of feeling adequate, good enough. Those are the things that we seek to feel better. And those are the things that we all have to confront in ourselves over the years. Doesn't matter whether you're a teen, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70. It's dealing with your own inadequacy. I don't feel adequate. It's dealing with your own, I'm not good enough. It's dealing with your own, I should be further ahead. It's dealing with your own self-criticism. It's dealing with your own, you know, judgment of everything, judgment of yourself, judgment of where you're at, of your job, of your state, of your money, and all these things. So criticism and judgment never brought us more of what we want. It is more self-compassion and love and understanding of where you are and why you got to where you are with choices you made, but also for a lot of us, just not understanding the rules of engagement. Like if we don't understand that what we think about and what we talk about and then what we get is all connected, then you go around complaining, you walk around talking about things that aren't working, you put all that feeling into it when you talk to your family, your friends, your boss, your colleague, and you don't realize in that moment that everything you just said for the last 20 minutes just sent out a big projection of, please give me a whole bunch of stuff I don't want again, because it costs you, all those conversations cost you, all those moments of feeling not good enough, inadequate. All of that is how we create, well, let's say the opposite of self-love. It is the opposite of self-love when we do that. But the thing is, if we don't know that, and no one ever taught us that, then we keep doing it because that's what the majority of the world operates on. So those that step outside of that understand how this works. You're very careful as to what you put your focus on, what you say. If you're going to complain, how long you're going to complain for, and your self-love, how good is it today? Because all of that, if your life's going like this with dramas, other people's, your own, work, money, health, somebody died, all these things, and it's this constant thing. Now, in terms of people dying, this is part of life that we have to deal with to the best of our ability, because we can't control those sorts of things. And a big part of life is letting go of thinking we can. So making peace with how things are and having more spiritual connections and spiritual understanding so that we can enjoy much better as we get older the just natural progression of life, that we age and then we die. We're born, we age, we die. So let's make the time that we're here a lot more comfortable, a lot more fun, and a lot mentally and emotionally easier for ourselves. Now, going on. Here is the secret of the world. God died to give man life and set man free. For however clearly God is aware of his creation, it does not follow that man, imaginatively created, is aware of God. To work this miracle, God had to die, then rise again as man, and none has ever expressed it so clearly as Blake. Blake says, or rather has Jesus say, unless I die, thou canst not live. But if I die, I shall rise again, and thou with me. Wouldst thou love one who never died for thee, or ever die for one who had not died for thee. Goodness me, talk about rubbing your head and your stomach at the same time. So if God died not for man and giveth not himself eternally for man, man could not exist. Okay. So these are obviously religious systems that this book is written on. It's whether you accept this stuff or whether you just go, you know what, that I'm not sure about. Feel free to question it. Feel free to go, I'm not sure about that. And to be open to, what do I think about it? I don't have to agree with every single thing that Neville says. As much as you know, I'm a huge lover of Neville. There are some things that I think, well, how do I feel about that? I'm not sure about that. I don't know if that actually works for me. So, you know, I think over the years, what I've come to is there is obviously a creator that created everything. I mean, the animals, nature, all these things couldn't work the way they do without someone who's an amazing architect behind the scenes. So we choose to call that architect God, source, infinite intelligence, universe in different ways. And I can't deny that. And I think it is an amazing thing how all the pieces fit together. And then it's like, okay, well, now there's little old me. What am I going to do in relation to all that to be more at peace, be more connected, and to feel love? Because really that's what it's all about. If you feel love, you feel happy. If you feel love, you feel content. If you feel love, you feel adequate. If you feel love, you feel good enough. If you feel love, you feel secure. So thinking about it today, and I think Neville's made it quite complicated here, and it's, you know, not the easiest thing to understand. This last part of this book is probably the hardest bit to understand and the most, let's say, there's other stories were very practical, written by people and easier to understand. This bit is more the mystical bit that you got to think about, okay, which way do I fall on this part? And really doesn't matter. This is just interesting knowledge, and we see where Neville goes with it. But is this something that how do I feel about this? How do I feel about what he said? How do I feel about, you know, God and the Jesus thing and all of that? It is a structure that's been set up by Christianity, and Neville is using references to this. So, you know, I know many of you come from the East. Is this something that you don't resonate with? Is this something that you go, you know what? I'm not sure if I believe in the God part, I believe in the imagining part, but all this other stuff, that's not my thing. And that's fine. I always think, take what you like, leave the rest, use the bits that you resonate with, and not everything is going to gel. Not everything's going to work. Okay. So going on, is there any questions? Nope. Just put your hand up if you want to, you know, even just make a comment. It doesn't have to be that you ask anything like we always do. Hello, Amy Jo in Bristol. It's breezy here too, my love. So carrying on. So God dies, that is to say, God has freely given himself for man. Deliberately, he has become man and has forgotten that he is God, which makes sense, because if some of us go, okay, do I believe in God? Do I feel like I am God? Do I know without a doubt? Is it a knowing? Is it just a belief that my family taught me? Is it something I learned at boarding school? Is it something that I just accepted as truth because that's what I was taught? But what's great is you can ponder it and go, okay, hang on. How do I feel about that? Do I feel that I am God? Do I feel that I am a part of God? Do I feel that I'm a creator? Do I feel like I'm an imaginist? Do I feel like I am those things? So, God has so completely offered his own self for man that he cries out on the cross, my God, why hast thou forsaken me? He has completely forgotten that he is God. But after God rises in one man, that man will say to his brothers, why stand we here trembling around, calling on God for help and not ourselves, in whom God dwells? And as my partner says, because my partner grew up extremely religious, even though, you know, he's more spiritual today, he always says, God helps those who help themselves. And that is what we are doing by studying Neville and learning to use our imagination. It's solving our problems that arise in those areas that we've mentioned already tonight, all those different areas of our lives. It's using the abilities we've been given. So learn and apply, learn and apply, learn and apply. So this first man that has been raised from the dead is known as Jesus Christ. The first fruits of those who have fallen asleep, the firstborn of the dead. For man, God died now. By a man has come also the resurrection of the dead. Jesus Christ resurrects his dead father by becoming his father. In Adam, the universal man, God sleeps. In Jesus Christ, the individualized God wakes. In waking, man, the created, has become God, the creator, and can truly say before the world was, I am. Just as God in his love for man so completely identified himself with man that he forgot that he was God. So man in his love for God must so completely identify himself with God that he lives the life of God that is imaginatively, which is something that we really enjoy. Those that have practiced it, done it for many years, or even just a short period, like using imagination to correct and create solutions to issues, whether you're using that for yourself or for someone in your life that you know is really suffering with something. Okay. Now, God's play, which transforms man into God, is revealed to us in the Bible. It is completely consistent in imagery and symbolism. The New Testament is hid in the Old Testament, and the Old is manifested in the New. The Bible is a version of God's law and his promise. It was never intended to teach history, but rather to lead man in faith through the furnaces of the affliction. And the furnaces of the affliction are all the things we suffer with, like relationships, like specific person, like the bank account dropping, like losing job, like doing a job that we hate and we're so sick of, like having some health issues that you just can't shake. And it is all possible to transform through a change in our consciousness. You have to change what you're conscious of to then create a shift in these areas. And as Neville talks about it, you let go of the old man and you hop into the new man. And the new man really just means the man with thoughts that are solution focused, that are the end result that you would prefer to whatever you're going through. Now, it was never intended to teach history, but rather to lead man in faith through the furnaces of the affliction to the fulfillment of God's promise, to rouse man from this profound sleep and awaken him as God. Its characters live not in the past, but in an imaginative eternity. They are personifications of the eternal spiritual states of the soul. They mark man's journey through eternal death and his awakening to eternal life. So this book is about revealing a few things. The law, imagination creates reality, and that you have the power and the ability to use your imagination to make a better life and to correct all these things that you go through. And the promise being that you are God and that you will over time start to go into the knowing of that, the believing of that first, and discovering that you have incredible powers to, let's say, transform all these areas of your life once you know that you are hooked up to the mothership, so to speak. So yeah, its characters live not in the past. Its characters live not in the past, but in an imaginative eternity. They are personifications of the eternal spiritual states of the soul. They mark man's journey through eternal death and his awakening to eternal life. The Old Testament tells us of God's promise. The New Testament tells us not how this promise was fulfilled, but how it is fulfilled. The central theme of the Bible is the direct, individual, mystical experiences of the birth of a child, that child of whom the prophet spoke. To us a child is born, to us a son is given, and the government will be upon his shoulder, and his name will be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. Of the increase of his government and of peace there will be no end. Isaiah 9:6-7. Now, does anybody want to comment on anything that we've just discussed? This is it's an unusual little chapter. If not, I will keep going. When the child is revealed to us, we see it, we experience it, and the response to this revelation can be stated in the words of Job. I have heard of thee by the hearing of the ear. By now by now my eye sees thee. So hearing of the ear, hearing God within, and then your eye sees thee. It's seeing God in things. It's seeing love in things. It's being able to see what you in the past would have been perhaps disgruntled or ungrateful or any of these things. You can look at similar situations and start to see different things because your spiritual maturity and evolution has started to develop. The story of the incarnation is not fable, allegory, or some carefully contrived fiction to enslave the minds of men, but mystical fact. It is a personal mystical experience of the birth of oneself out of one's own skull, symbolized in the birth of a child wrapped in swaddling clothes and laying on the floor. There is a distinction between hearing of this birth of a child from one's own skull, a birth which no scientist or historian could ever possibly explain, and actually experiencing the birth, holding in your own hands and seeing with your own eyes this miraculous child, a child born from above out of your own skull, a birth contrary to all the laws of nature. The question as it is posed in the Old Testament, ask now and see, can a male bear a child? Why then do I see every man with his hands delivering himself like a woman in labor? Why has every face turned pale? The Hebrew word chalatz, mistranslated loins, means to draw out, to deliver, to withdraw itself. The drawing of oneself out of one's own skull was exactly what the prophet foresaw as the necessary birth from above, a birth giving man's entrance into the kingdom of God and reflective perception on the highest levels of being. Throughout the ages, deep calls to deep. Rouse thyself, why sleepest thou, O Lord? Awake. The event, as it is recorded in the Gospels, actually takes place in man, but of that day or that hour when the time will come for the individual to be delivered, no one knows but the Father. Do not marvel that I said to you, you must be born from above. The wind blows where it wills, and you hear the sound of it, but you do not know whence it comes or whither it goes. So it is with everyone who is born of the Spirit. So Neville does talk about this giving birth from the skull, and this is an experience that he himself went through, and he will talk about it in the next couple of pages. So, yeah, the revelation in the Gospel of John is true. Here is my experience of this birth from above. So this is Neville's story. Like Paul, I did not receive it from man, nor was I taught it. It came through the actual mystical experience of being born from above. None can speak truly of this mystical birth from above, but one who has experienced it. I had no idea that this birth from above was literally true. Who, before the experience, could believe that the child, the wonderful counselor, the mighty God, the everlasting Father, the Prince of Peace, was woven into his own skull? Who, before the experience, would understand that his maker is his husband and the Lord of hosts is his name? Who would believe that the Creator went unto his own creation, man, and knew it would be himself, and that this entrance into the skull of man, this union of God and man, resulted in the birth of a son out of the skull of man? So this kind of throws the spanner in the works of who we know from stories of who gave birth to Jesus. So which is it? Which birth gave to that man eternal life and union with his Creator forever? If I now tell what I experienced that night, I do so not to impose my ideas on others, but that I may give hope to those who, like Nicodemus, wonder how a man can be born when he is old. How can he enter a second time into his mother's womb and be born? How can this be? This is how it happened to me. Therefore, I will now write the vision and make it plain upon tablets, so he may run who reads it. For still the vision awaits its time. So I've just lost my page. For still the vision awaits its time. It hastens to the end. It will not lie. If it seems slow, wait for it. It will surely come. It will not delay. Behold, he whose soul is not upright in him shall fail, but the righteous shall live by his faith. In the early hours of the morning of July 20th, which is interesting because we are in that month. Of all the months, we are in that month. July 20th, 1959, in the city of San Francisco, a heavenly dream in which the arts flourished was suddenly interrupted by the most intense vibration centered at the base of my skull. Then a drama as real as those I experienced when I was fully awake began to unfold. I awoke from a dream to find myself completely entombed within my own skull. I tried to force my way out through its base. Something gave way, and I felt myself move head downward through the base of my skull. I squeezed myself out inch by inch. When I was almost out, I held what I took to be the foot of the bed and pulled the remaining portion of me out of my skull. There on the floor I lay for a few seconds. Then I rose and I looked at my body on the bed. It was pale, of face, laying on its back, tossing from side to side like one in recovery from a great ordeal. As I contemplated it, hoping that it would not fall off the bed, I became aware that the vibration which started the whole drama was not only in my head, but now was also coming from the corner of the room. As I looked over to the corner, I wondered if that vibration could have caused by a very high wind, a wind strong enough to vibrate the window. I didn't realize that the vibration which I still felt within my head was related to that which seemed to be coming from the corner of the room. Looking back to the bed, I discovered that my body was gone, but in its place sat my three older brothers. My oldest brother sat where the head was. My second and third brothers sat where the feet were. None seemed to be aware of me. Although I was aware of them and could discern their thoughts, I suddenly became aware of the reality of my own invisibility. I noticed that they too were disturbed by the vibration coming from the corner of the room. My third brother was the most disturbed and went over to investigate the cause of the disturbance. His attention was attracted by something on the floor, and looking down, he announced, "It's Neville's baby." My other two brothers, in most incredulous voices, said, "How can Neville have a baby?" My brother lifted the infant, wrapped in swaddling clothes, and laid him on the bed. I then, with my invisible hands, lifted the babe and asked, "How is my sweetheart?" He looked into my eyes and smiled, and I awoke in this world to ponder my greatest of my many mystical experiences. Tennyson had a description of death as a warrior, a skeleton high on a night black horse issuing forth at midnight. But when Gareth's sword cut through the skull, there was in it the bright face of a blooming boy, fresh as a flower, newborn. Two other visions I will tell, because they bear out of the truth of my assertion that the Bible is mystical fact, that everything written about the promised child in the law of Moses and the prophets and the Psalms must be mystically experienced in the imagination of the individual. The child's birth is a sign and a portent signaling the resurrection of David, the Lord's anointed, of whom he said, "You are my son, today I have begotten you." Psalms 2.7. 5 months after the birth of the child, on the morning of December 6, 1959, in the city of Los Angeles, a vibration similar to the one which preceded his birth started in my head. This time, its intensity was centered at the top of my head. Then came a sudden explosion, and I found myself in a modestly furnished room. There, leaning against the side of an open door, was my son, David, of biblical fame. He was a lad in his early teens. What struck me forcibly about him was the unusual beauty of his face and figure. He was, as he is described in the first book of Samuel, ruddy with beautiful eyes and very handsome. Not for one moment did I feel myself to be anyone other than who I am now. Yet I knew this was David, this lad was David, was my son, and he knew that I was his father, for the wisdom from above is without uncertainty. As I sat there contemplating the beauty of my son, the vision faded and I awoke. I and the children whom the Lord has given me are signs and portents in Israel from the Lord of hosts, who dwell on Mount Zion. God gave me David as my very own son. I will rise up your son after you, who shall come forth from your body. I will be his father, and he shall be my son. God is known in no other way than through the Son. No one knows who the Son is except the Father, or who the Father is except the Son, and anyone to whom the Son chooses to reveal him. Luke 10:22. The experience of being David's father is the end of man's pilgrimage on earth. The purpose of life is to find the father of David, the Lord's anointed, the Christ. Abner, whose son is this youth? And Abner said, "As your soul lives, O king, I can't tell." And the king said, "Inquire whose son the stripling is." And as David returned from the slaughter of the Philistine, Abner took him and brought him before Saul, with the head of the Philistine in his hand. And Saul said to him, "Whose son are you, young man?" And David answered, "I am the son of your servant Jesse, the Bethlehemite." Jess is any form of the verb to be. In other words, I am the son of who I am self-begotten, I am the son of God the Father, and I am the Father. I and my Father are one. I am the image of the invisible God. He who has seen me has seen the Father. Whose son is not about David, but about David's father, whom the king had promised to make free in Israel. Note, all of these passages, the king's inquiry is not about David, but about David's father. I have found David, my servant. He shall cry to me, "Thou art my father, my God, and the rock of my salvation, and I will make him the firstborn, the highest of the kings of the earth." Psalms 89. The individual who is born from above will find and know him to be his very own son. Then he will ask the Pharisees, who are always with us, "What do you think of the Christ. Whose son is he? And when they say to him, the son of David, he will say to them, how is it then that David in the spirit calls him Lord? If David thus calls him Lord, how is he his son? Man's misconception of the role of the son, which is only a sign and a portent, he made the son an idol, has made the son an idol. Little children, keep yourselves from idols. God awakes, and that man in whom he awakes becomes his own father's father. He who was David's son, Jesus Christ, the son of David, has become David's father. No longer will I cry to our father David, thy child. Acts, I have found David. He has cried to me, thou art my father. Now I know myself to be one of the Elohim, the God who became man. The man may become God. Great indeed, we confess, is the mystery of our religion. Tim, if the Bible were history, it would not be a mystery. Wait for the promise of the Father, that is for David, God's son, who will reveal you as the Father. This promise, says Jesus, you heard from me, and to its fulfillment at that moment in time when it pleases God to give you his son as your offspring, which is Christ. Okay, so that's just, that is what it is. And it's interwoven in a loop. And my understanding of this is it's like the God, the Father, the Son, it's all this loop. And we are to remember and experience. And Neville has had one of those mystical experiences where he gave birth from his head of his own self. Is that weird? Yeah, it's not exactly the norm. Is it normal to go through this and then become a mystic? Or was he a mystic before? This is all food for thought. How do you feel about the way he describes this? How do you feel about what he's saying? Does it make sense to you? Do you just zone out and go, oh my goodness, I can't absorb it? Like, what does this mean to you? And is this something that you would use and apply for yourself? Is this relevant for you in, like, we're talking, we're talking 1959. This is 40, 50, 60, we're looking at 40, 50, 60 plus years. Now, obviously, people still read the Bible today. It's not about the 60 years in regards to the information, but is it the way that it's written? Does it sink in, or does it just go right over your head and you're just not sure what to do with it? So again, food for thought. A figure of speech is used for the purpose of calling attention to, emphasizing and intensifying the reality of the literal sense. The truth is literal. The words used are figurative. The curtain of the temple was torn in two from top to bottom, and the earth shook and the rocks were split. On the morning of April 8th, 1960, 4 months after was revealed to me that I was David's father, a bolt of lightning out of my skull split me in two from the top of my skull to the base of my spine. I was cleft as though I were a tree that had been hit by lightning. Then I felt and saw myself as a golden liquid light moving up my spine in a serpent motion. As I entered my skull, it vibrated like an earthquake. Every word of God proves true. He is a shield to those who take refuge in him. Do not add to his words, lest he rebuke you and you be found a liar. And as Moses lifted up the serpent in the wilderness, so must the Son of Man be lifted up, which is what we are doing with the imaginal stories, with applying it, with trying different things, with being able to create a desire, with correcting all the problems and things we don't like into solutions. This is how we are lifted up. This is how we get to the place where our lives feel better, easier, more fun. and that you can be a happy soul. Not all the time, of course, because we're human, but more happiness, more joy, and more being lifted up by practicing what this whole book was about, was that imagination creates reality. So these mystical experiences will help to rescue the Bible from the externals of history, persons and events, and to restore it to its real significance in the life of man. Scripture must be fulfilled in us. God's promise will be fulfilled. You will have these experiences, and you shall be my witnesses in Jerusalem and all Judea and Samaria and to the end of the earth. The promise is still maturing to its time, its appointed time. But how long, vast and severe the trials you find, David, your son, who will reveal you as God the Father, were long to tell, but it hastens to the end. It will not fail. So wait, for there will be no postponement. Is anything too wonderful for the Lord? At the appointed time, I will return to you in the spring, and Sarah shall have a son. End of the law and the promise. So I don't know about you, but when I first read that chapter, I was just like, what the heck is that? I was just understanding that Neville had an amazing spiritual experience, that he said he gave birth from his head of his own self. But what the hell? I mean, this book just took a total left turn from the stories that we read over the last 9 weeks. You just go, what on earth was that chapter? Like, you just don't expect it. Christina.
Yeah. So, but actually, like the line, sort of, I think it's the third paragraph from to the end.
Yeah.
When it says truth is literal, the words used are figurative. I highlighted that. I think that kind of summarize a little bit about how then to receive what the words that he put things in, right? Because it could be figurative, it could be like his rebirth, because I got me thinking, like, most of us don't have any actual memory of our physical birth, right?
That's it.
Like sneezing through a canal and go, I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, it's almost like, I remember when my law of attraction friend and I first read this book in the 90s, I said to her, that just freaks me out. Like, I don't even want to know about that stuff. That is not about me imagining anything, using practical things, very grassroots. That was just like too weird. This is the stuff that you go, okay. And I've heard that this is what turns Neville's stuff into a cult. It's a bit cultish. It's weird, So I'll be honest, that chapter is definitely not my favorite. It's too much, too heavy. Like Gita just said, very hard to comprehend. And really, it's like you're reading and you're going around in circles, around in circles, around in circles, around in circles. God, man, man, God, God, man, man, God. And that part I can understand, but you go, what did that really give me, that chapter? And it's a shame that, for me, I think it's a shame that that's how the book ends, because the rest of the book is electrifying and amazing. I think this is going to put a lot of people off Neville, not draw people to him. It's very, I think, controversial. Not saying that I don't think people have mystical spiritual experiences. I really do believe that there's a whole realm of that, and I'm not like in the science world where I need stuff to see that things are real. But you go, okay, how did that really help anyone in terms of developing their imaginal skills, believing and living in the end, believing in imagination creates the reality, explaining more clearly what's the law, what's the promise? That, I think, personally, and this is, you know, a closed session, I don't think that chapter did him any favors.
I think that chapter makes me feel closer to him as a human being, because he's so ingrained in that language of like Christianity, yes. Right? Yes. But so it's quite interesting then, like, see how then he uses that, like he's like dipped in that entire like consciousness, right? And then that's the language that he has.
Yes.
In terms of describing, somebody wrote like his awakening. I think that's how he would describe his awakening of like birth. But like virginal, because it's a man from his own head is not sex, you know, like but it's like so it's quite interesting. It made me felt like close to him as a person.
Okay, nice. Well, like, that's a good thing to get out of it.
I mean, it's like something I don't really relate to, but I did love that the line though. He says the truth is literal, the words used are figurative. So I think that was that in that this. So he goes back to his like mastered of language too. So he had his own upbringing and perspective, and then but he also acknowledged like the words itself is figurative. I think it's like quite immense in terms of what he was trying to convey.
Yes,
cannot be described for him. It's like coming out his own head. It made me think about Athena, like Athena's female, but it's coming out of her head as like the wisdom. Yes. That's what Greek mythology. That's why like she's the goddess of wisdom, but. Kind of like taking a truth as literal, but words are figurative. I thought that was like that was like gold for me from that chapter.
Oh, good. I mean, I've thought about this chapter a lot, and my friend and I have talked about it off and on over the 30 years, and we both we both didn't really like it, to be honest. I would have loved if Neville would have cut out all that Bible talk and talk directly about the experience and how it affected him. But was that possible in the 50s? No, maybe it's cloaked in all of that on purpose because the level of acceptance at that time was heavy on the Christianity, and people doing mystical experiences and all of that. That was all, you know, burning witches at the stake and all the hoo-ha. You know, there was still this taboo. There was still a lot of taboo. So even though it would have been great if you could have shared really what did you get out of it? What did that help you with? Did that help you with imagining? What did you create after that? I mean, if you could just sit Neville down and ask him those questions, that experience that he shared might have become more real and not so weird from where we're standing in 2023.
He might have really believed that he came out his head.
Yeah, I know. And you just go, oh, okay.
But he did say truth is literal, but words are figurative. Keep going.
I mean, that's why I didn't make many comments as I was reading, because in this chapter, it's so highly taken from the Bible. It loops around and around in different ways. So he's saying the same thing in different quoting different bits. So it's like, I find there's a part of me that glazes over when I read that because it goes around in circles. And Gita, like you said, it's like from a different opera compared to the other chapters. Yes, as we sometimes say, at least that's how you're saying, at least that's how I feel at the moment. Yes, it's almost like that chapter doesn't belong to that book. It's like, you know, you've been focusing on watching all these amazing stories and then Neville's little commentary in between. And then there's this heavy religious stuff at the end with this mystical experience that he's tried to cloak in the words of the Bible. Now, do we think about what is he really trying to say from that place in the 1950s and 59, 60? Was he trying to tell us more than what we've actually picked up? I mean, I've read this book 100 times. I have gone through it with a fine-tooth comb. Every time I read that, it's like I glaze over to a lot of it because it's just so wordy and going over these things that I personally don't resonate with. And you guys know I love Neville, but this has to be the chapter of all his books, of all his teachings, of all his lectures, that I think it went too far for me personally. So I'm glad you got something out of it though, Christina, because it does make you kind of go, huh? You know, like it makes you think about what the heck is that? It really kind of shocks you out of the normal pattern of what the book has been until this chapter.
I think the whole thing was rather trippy.
Yes.
So I was talking, so I'm like thinking like, well, I don't have like, I mean, birthing out of my head, but like we all went through actual birth. What would it be like if we all have that memory of coming out like the, like into the world? But like that itself is like, I think he's in his Bible language. I thought it was rather like interesting because I would never. I'm not deep in that, but it's interesting how it's like it's also like such. It's like it made me thought about other myths, like in like the birth from mythical figures in Japanese and Chinese stories. There's always like from the rock, from the peach, from meat, like so it's other like the origin story, and I suppose that kind of fits into that philosophical question of like why are we here, like all these things. But really trippy. I didn't know whether he was a little bit
I know, like, it's just like I'm just going to read out what Kathleen's written. First time I read it, I had to just start back at the beginning of the book to kind of forget all of the mystical dream stuff and focus on reality that I wanted to change. Yes, it does sound like a dream or a hallucination that he's trying to interpret. Exactly. Because obviously if someone gave birth from the base of their neck and skull, it would have ended up in hospital. So it's is this an actual internal mystical experience, like when you go into imagination and you're creating a living in the end scene? I mean, when he talks about that he was laying on the floor and that thing was, that part of him that had given birth was still recovering like a woman does after giving birth, because it was a traumatic experience. But you go, okay, were you actually seeing that, or were you dreaming about that, or were you like, what the heck was that? What is that? Is it what was it going on in your head as a visual scene? Was it something you think you saw on the outside? Did you experience it and you know absolutely it was true for you? Like, we can't argue with people's experiences because that's their experience, but it's like we can't even ask him. We're left with the question marks of what really happened. I will say there are two people in my life, when I was in a Neville group, when I was actually on social media years ago, two of them said that they had been through this experience. So is it that you can ask them and then find out, but then that's their experience, doesn't mean it's like Neville's? Is it a birth of some other higher level of consciousness? I don't know. I mean, I haven't had that experience and I can't say I'll be asking for it. It's not really something I will be going, hey, please let me have that. I really want that. It's not something. I'm happy to meditate, download, get visions and all of that. That's enough for me. I'm quite happy to die, and that's the level I stay at. That's enough. But some people want to experience these things more than others. I know there's people along the way that have wanted to experience enlightenment. Was that a little stepping stone on the way to enlightenment? I don't know. This is all just, food for thought and conversation, because it's a real twisty chapter. It's a twisty chapter. And, many of you have been here reading this book and reading it on your own. You know, it's definitely odd. Christina.
So I'm going to offer another hypothesis.
Okay, go ahead.
Abraham Hicks, she talks about how we have resistance to our belief, and then as we go through scenarios in our lives, we find out our resistance, and that's how our path to sort of rising on our vibration. And so perhaps being in, I think Neville was from like really religious background, right? So perhaps the resistance is so great that he has to imagine himself being pulled out his own skull in order to, that's
maybe. I mean, this is all stuff that we can bat around because we can never ask Neville and we will never know. You know, I mean, I remember years ago, I used to sit in meditation and I would say to my friend, I'm going to call in Neville and ask about that skull thing because that's just weird. I said, I just want to sit in meditation. I'm going to say to God or source, right, can I just talk to Neville because that he just left us hanging with that. It's so weird. Please come back, get back here and explain what that was, you know. So, and to this day, I can't even remember whether it worked, but I was on a mission in those days to try and get more information to decode this because it kind of drove me a bit nuts in the beginning. Like, what's the point of that? You've left us now. It's almost like watching a Netflix series and it's been really great. And then the last episode, it just goes, and you just go, what the heck? You didn't put any thought into that last episode, you know? So I feel like that's what happened for this. For me, hopefully not for you guys. I mean, I wanted to talk honestly and openly about this because this is the big bête noire, as they say in French, in this book. It's the big surprise. It's the thing that you go, that's really not where I thought this was going to go. It's almost like I remember reading it thinking he was going to round off, you know, a chapter where he'd be talking about how everybody used all these different things and that this is possible for you and how about you learn to apply it. And here's a little summary of things that almost like a rounding up final chapter of an essay where he would summarize it and put it there for you to use. But he just went off on a total other trajectory and left us hanging there on a cliff. So there we go. I
love that. Words are figurative. He said that.
Figurative. Well, you got one thing out of it. You know, that's what you got out of it. And yeah, it's very, you know, it's just kind of leaves you there going, okay, I'm going to scratch my head and think about that. I remember when I first read that, I thought, I don't know if I want to read Neville. This is actually a bit too weird for me. And I put Neville down for a while after reading that for the first time. I remember thinking, this guy's off his head. He's really not, you know, like, okay. Yeah, imagination creates reality. Living in the end, everyone's you pushed out, no problem. Now I'm starting to question, is he actually a little bit mad or he's got schizophrenia or he's got a split personality? I did have those thoughts at that time. So, you know, I started to think I'm starting to read something that's from some mad scientist that's lost the plot. And this is the book that he's actually revealing that he's lost the plot. So, you know, if you're having those thoughts, don't think you're alone because that was definitely, I love this book. I don't read that last chapter anymore. When I go through it, I go through chapters 1 to 14 and I stick to that. Like Kathleen was saying, go back to the beginning, use the techniques, read the stories, get inspired, and then apply it to what you want to do, what you want to manifest, and you keep it nice and tight. And you just do that. So yes, there we go. The Law and the Promise, 10 weeks we have now done. And yeah, leaving you on that very strange note. Yes, Christina?
I do have a question though, because the chapter is called The Promise. Then what is
exactly?
Like really entertained by how he's coming out his head.
Yeah. So the question to all of you, and food for thought, and we can discuss this a bit. What is the law and what is the promise? Now that you've read the whole book, do you understand what the law is, and do you understand what the promise is? I had to read the book quite a few times to actually come to my own conclusion. What is the law and what is the promise? After reading it as many times as I have, this is what I've come to. The law is God is our own human imagination. That's the law. The law is imagination creates reality. The law is understanding everyone's you pushed out. And the law is living in the end and letting go of the old man. That to me is the law. Those are the laws that Neville has revealed as the themes throughout this book. So I would say, from my experience, Kathleen, you're saying, yes, that's how you see the law. Okay. So that's the conclusion I've come about the law. Now, the promise is a bit more of a fuzzy target. Is the promise the skull experience? Because if it is, I don't really want that. I'm quite happy with just the law. Sarit, I'm glad you said that, because I was just heading in that direction. The promise is maybe the awakening. The promise is our manifestation. Good answers, people. Yeah. I would say too, the promise is getting to the place where you spiritually evolve and mature to know that all these things that you've learned and tested and tried and now have confidence in, the promise is you can change the whole foundation of your life and be more mentally, emotionally, especially emotionally comfortable. So you understand how the systems work. You then use your mind to apply it. And the promise is that you start to see the evidence, but you're almost at the point where you don't need to see the evidence because you've done it so many times, you know and trust your confidence in yourself. So the promise is feeling adequate. The promise is knowing that with focus and love and repetition and enjoying imaginal scenes and living in the end and using the law of assumption, that all of that generates results. And results is the hatching of your desires rather than just reacting to whatever the hell's going on in your life. You're now more in the driver's seat rather than going, oh my God, what's happening today? And being totally destabilized. You become more stable. All of these things, I would say, are the promise. Yes, Kathleen, in a sense, we're reborn once we learn the law. Exactly. And you're not suffering as much. You're not torturing yourself as much, etc., etc. Justyna, you said the promise is creating the world you want to experience. Nice. You can create your own reality. Therefore, reality is really vague. It is not set in stone. No, it's not static. It moves. It's moving all the time, depending on what you're doing, what you're doing, what you're doing, what you're doing. So nice answers, everybody. It's thought-provoking because you read the book and you go, hang on, he didn't actually say the law is this, the promise is this. He doesn't do that. You're left up to your own level of understanding on whatever year you read that, with however long you've been reading Neville, with all your life experience and your current living in 2023, as in what's going on around us, you bring all of that into your understanding of what he means today. So, you know, the whole thing of this book, I think, is let me try what that person did. I mean, I remember reading this and thinking, one day I want to write my own book because I'm so inspired by these stories. But I remember thinking these stories are so old fashioned. They're from so long ago. Wouldn't it be nice to write stories from this day and age? And this book inspired me to create creative things. It also inspired me to create an amazing relationship. It inspired me to move to London and to leave you know, my job, my friends, everything, and to hop into a relationship in another city. It created my business. It created talking about Neville. And I remember saying to my friend, who the heck is going to want to hear about this guy? Especially when they read the skull chapter, they're going to think I'm weird if I'm coaching and I'm talking about that, you know, but it's, you go, there's so much in here that has inspired me to expand into creating amazing results. And my whole life has totally changed. And this was the book that changed it. This book, it electrified me to the point where I couldn't sleep at night. It would run a current through my body. No, I didn't give birth out of my skull, but it definitely electrified me. It would keep me awake with it was like putting the phone on a charger dock, and the electricity would run through my system. And I was severely abandoned and heartbroken when I was reading that. So it was like it gave me life. So I will never, ever, ever forget Neville for what he gave me at that time. And I vowed that I would always talk about his book and his teachings and pay it forward as it was given to me. And I would say I agree with Neville about 90% of the time. I used to agree with him 100% because I didn't have really much knowledge back then as to be able to agree or disagree because I didn't understand it. But today, I'm not, I'll be honest, for me, I'm not heavy on the quotes and the readings and the stuff going around in circles. I don't relate to that. I zone out with that. So that would be the only 10% I'm not fond of. But the teachings, the stories, the everyday people that have shared stuff, even though it's written in Old English, the stories written by ordinary people are easier to understand than I think a lot of the Bible reading part. Kathleen, what are you saying? In a sense, I could do without all the Bible scripture. Me too. I'll be honest. Me too. We're talking honestly here. Totally agree. I mean, I'm not against the Bible, but I definitely didn't grow up Christian, and I definitely didn't grow up with any religion. So I find that stuff, it's like, what are they talking about? I glaze over a bit. But my partner grew up with all that. So if I need help with any of it, I just go, what the hell is he talking about here? And I get him to explain a bit of the background. So it's learning without the heavy laden Psalms, Sam, Luke, all this stuff that unless you grew up with that. And I know a lot of people did, and they really enjoy the Bible stories. And I think that is a wonderful part of the Bible. Again, like in this book, the stories, Daniel in the lion's den and all these things that you can relate to the characters in the story. Relaying stories, relaying information and knowledge through stories, everyday people can understand that no matter what level of education they have, as long as you speak English. So yeah, so that's it. The Law and the Promise is now finished. And we've left you with the skull experience for you to ponder and see what you do with it. You now know you've read the book from cover to cover if you've got it. And I know some of you have come in and out, out of these sessions at different times, but you can read the book at any time. You can even read the free PDF. You go to Google and put in free PDF, Law and the Promise, Neville Goddard, and there's somebody that's got it up because I've looked it up to do research when I didn't have my book and it was in another country. It's there. So you can read it without buying it if that's your thing. So
Agnes, can I ask did you ever ask your partner what he thought of the skull story? Because I think that's also kind of our character for Christianity though too, right?
I didn't actually, Christina. I might ask him. Maybe that's relevant in the Bible somewhere. That's a really good point. I will ask him. He doesn't read Neville because he just goes, that guy just stole all the stuff from the Bible. I'm not listening to him.
Plagiarist.
So we have a laugh because I love Neville and he just goes, he's just another guy that's taking stuff from the Bible. It's like, okay. So that's the end of our conversations. But I will ask him about the skull thing. I'm glad you brought that up.
I've never heard of that.
No.
From Christian references. It's more like Greek mythology. Yeah, I think that's the only reference I have.
Okay.
I don't know if that would be interesting.
I'll let you know. I'll email you and let you know. Justyna, just wanted to say, and yes, thank you for creating this community and support. It is very helpful for many, and you spend your free time for us. Oh, my pleasure. My pleasure. Look, a lot of people helped me along the way. And my law of attraction friend that I was talking to this morning, she has helped me for 30 years. And she's the one that gave me this very copy. And she gave me the book, Florence Scovel Shin, the 4 books in one. It was her that actually started off my spiritual journey. And we have discussed, dissected, highlighted, referenced stories, and this was all before YouTube. So I'm very grateful that she gave me a book that changed the whole trajectory of my life, because we get many books in our lives. And, you know, if I had a Bible, it would be this one. This is it. If I say I have a Bible that I go back to, you know, the doctor and his wife, and, you know, those stories which were profoundly amazing in people's manifestations, but were incredibly simple to understand. They were so beautifully written and so beautifully given. Those people gave the stories to Neville. Neville printed the book. The book still exists 60 years on. I mean, it's a thing that just keeps on giving. And, you know, I mean, I know many of you know there's many Neville YouTube channels and all of that, which, you know, it's good. There's lots of people sharing Neville. It's just sometimes it's watching the interpretation. And I think you're always better off listening to Neville in his own words, hearing his own voice, getting used to the pace at which he says things. And then you go, okay, let me ponder what he said and let me see what my interpretation is. So you're not really getting anybody else's twisted interpretation, as in twisted, not as in negative, but their twist on it. It's not watered down by that. And I think that is the best way to learn Neville, if you can. I know sometimes we need stepping stones, but just be mindful, you know, if someone hasn't read Neville for more than, I think, 15 years, I wouldn't be listening to their interpretation, because what you think after a year, 2 years, 5 years, 10 years is very different to what you think after 15 or 20. So be mindful of who you listen to. And if you can listen to Neville, there's 2, actually, while I think of it, there's 2 of my favorite Neville Goddard in his own voice lectures. One's called Rearrange the Mind. It's got a cartoon face of Neville. It's about 45 minutes. And another one's called Mental Diets, again in his own voice. Those 2 are ones that even after all these years, I still go back to. They're 2 of the best ones, I think. And the recordings are pretty good. They're not kind of really distorted with heaps of noise, that old crackle. So everybody, that's it. I hope you have got something out of it and that you can apply it and that you can have a bit of a laugh about the birth from the head over the next few days. Thank you, Sarit. Everybody, you can unmute yourselves and say bye if you want. Bye, Christina.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Goodbye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye, everybody.
Thanks.
See you on YouTube as always.
See you. Bye.
Bye.